We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome to another episode of the Mankind Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Clift, and today I am joined by John Henry Parker. Mate, we have a lot to dive into today. I'm very excited to talk about your new book, to talk about your work, your history in men's work, and just your journey alone has been quite the hero's journey. But before we do that, let's kick things off with a check-in. John, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this, Brandon. I've been really paying attention to your work and been following the Mankind Project for many, many years. So I would just check in to say I'm checking in with a lot of a gratitude, a lot of willingness to really be open and transparent and just be, empathetic to the suffering that we all go through. And I just feel really comfortable talking to you about my book, and so I'm just checking in with a lot of gratitude and pretty relaxed, and I just feel really like this is the right place for me to be right now. Amen.
Heard. Thank you. Brandon, checking in with joy. This is a long time coming. I heard of you through Mike Patterson, good friend of mine, and man who frequents the podcast here, and love the interview you had with him. Very insightful, and looking forward to seeing where we can go from here. Gratitude to spend time with men like yourself who have experienced things that I have not. People who have experienced things that I know others around me have. And so I can glean from you, the conversation, the alchemy that we're about to create together. It always amazes me. You just never know who this is going to touch. You never know the impact of how a simple conversation between you and I, what that could mean for someone out there. And so without further ado, I am in. John, we in our pre-interview, we spoke a lot about the hero's journey, which is something I very much like to put the specs on and geek out on. And with every kind of hero's journey, there's the origin, right? There's the original world. There's the beginning. And I'd love to get just a snapshot. We're going to go deep into your life, but I'd love to get a snapshot of kind of the early days. Can you summarize what growing up was like? And then we'll get into Gladys.
Well, I was raised by a really traumatized alcoholic combat veteran father who was in Korea in the Marine Corps. He was a demolition technician. And really, really terrible experience. And then he went to Vietnam as an Air Force reconnaissance photographer, and he got shot down with his pilot and had to avoid being captured and live in the swamps and jungles. And I don't know much more about that, but it just traumatized him even more. And so he was really a very dominant, introspective, kind of violent person. And he didn't know how to manage his emotions. And so he self-medicated with at least a 12-pack every night. And it was always very predictable. So most of my life, spending as an infant growing up, was learning how to play towards his emotions and pander to him to figure out what mood was he coming home in. And as he got more and more drunk, like what was going to happen next. And so I spent a lot of time, hiding out under my bed. It was really a very abusive, physically violent environment. And he should have gone to prison. It was just child abuse of the worst kind on our whole family, And so, I would literally go to school and I would have new welts on my backside and my legs, literally growing over old welts. And it was like a little science project. I'd be pressing on my jeans all day long because I was fascinated with the healing process. It's a lot of stuff that I normalized. Then outside of our house, I was raised in Southwest Phoenix, and there's a lot of gangs and a lot of predators and I got chased a lot by groups of guys and caught a lot of times and got beat up. And I won some fights, but against a bunch of guys, getting broken fingers and cracked ribs, and it was just their fun, to terrorize me. So every time I went outside, my mom was sending me to the store. It was a terrorizing experience. So, and then I decided I'm going to go in the military and I'm not going to take anybody's shit anymore. So I went in the Army, and then I went in the Marine Corps, and I learned how to take care of myself. And that stuff never happened again, but I still carried the wounds and just all the suffering from my upbringing. It took a long time, quite a few decades, to kind of unwind all that.
Man, I can imagine. Isn't that such a common narrative I've witnessed hearing more from people that have served, that oftentimes it was joining the military was an opportunity to reclaim power that was once taken. What better way than to join the United States military? Like that's the ticket, right? However, it's oftentimes a subpar and often traumatizing hero's journey in itself. I've been working with traumatized combat veterans for 25 years, and man, I tell you, there's a combination of deep pride for what you accomplish, and then, man, the loss of friends, and there's just so much that goes along with it, where it's you have mixed feelings about the whole experience. Yeah. So let's go to childhood again. You mention a lot in your book about your Aunt Gladys, of this role model, this mentor who played a big role in shaping you. Curious of your relation to her and how she came into your world.
Well, my mom was an only child, and my great Aunt Gladys, she just loved and adored my mom because she didn't have children herself. And so she just doted over my mother during her upbringing. And Gladys, we call her Glad affectionately, she was a Canadian war correspondent in Europe during the rise of fascism and the Nazi invasion of France and Paris. And she worked with the Free French, the resistance. She was a reporter. She got to interview all the dignitaries. And then she was part of the big evacuation from France down to Bordeaux to catch a ship over to England, escaping the Nazis. And so she wrote a book called One Woman's War about the experience of her journalistic life. And then there was a documentary channel about her life up in Canada called Eyewitness to War. And it really kind of chronicles her life. And she was awarded the French Legion Medal of Honor from the French government like decades after the war. So she's a really, really important figure in Canada about their participation in the war. And the University of Regina has a whole archive of her life's work and all of her writings. So she would come down, and she worked at the French embassy in Ottawa for 30 years after the war. So every winter for about 5-6 years, she would come down for 2 months just before Thanksgiving and then leave sometime in January to get out of the cold extremes of Ottawa. And we lived in Phoenix. So she would come live with us. And she could have lived with my grandparents a few hours away, but she chose to embed herself in our house because she knew how violent my father was. And so for those 2 months, it was the most relative safety I had. And I say in the book that I had a secret that my brother and sister never found out about. She would get up at 4:30 every day, and she would cook Canadian bacon, sharp cheddar cheese, toast, and it would have coffee, cream, and maple syrup. And so I would wake up about 4:30 every day, and I'd smell the bacon, and I would sneak out of my bedroom and didn't wake my brother or sister up. And I would literally have like 3 hours every morning sitting at her feet talking with her. Wow. And she was provisioning me for my hero's journey before I even understood what that meant. Like I'm gonna share throughout our conversation here a bunch of these little pearls, but like one of the biggest ones was, She told me I was going to do extraordinary things with my life, and I believed her because she said it. I just had to, it was just true. And there's a lot of things that she was able to share to provision me. And my wife sees it really well. She goes, Glad didn't save my life. She provisioned me to save my own life. And it only takes,
go ahead.
like an angel. It only takes one adult of healthy character to shape and influence a child's life forever. And that was in my case. And she was our family matriarch. And until I was in my 40s, she was my confidential resource. Anytime I had a problem, she was always there. And she's still there now. It's been a great having her influence guiding my life.
How neat that as a true mentor should, if we're looking at Campbell's stages of the hero's journey, as a true mentor should, they don't do the work for you, but they provide opportunities, insights, and openings for you to become the hero that you were meant to be. And how neat that came from a matriarchal figure as opposed to paternal, male, someone that you could very much embody their energy. Right? So
yeah.
I think that's so neat and really opens the door for many out there to broaden their horizons as to who might be able to guide them in this phase and very much future phases of life.
Right. Well, she was a representation of what a really healthy, mature, intelligent woman was in the world. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother was very similar. They were Canadians, and they were just really, intelligent, kind, people. Mm-hmm. And then contrasted against my father's violence, it was two different worlds, that I was needing to balance. But he would never say anything negative to her or bad with her when she was with us. He was always a consummate gentleman. Mm-hmm. But man, before she arrived, like an hour or two before she got to the airport, he would line us up against the hallway wall, and he would poke us in the chest with his knuckle and say, "We don't talk about things that happen in this house with Gladys. If I hear anything, even a whisper, you will pay." And so this is kind of craziness where Gladys trying to get me to open up and talk to her, and I'm like, I can't talk about that. What do you mean you can't talk about that?
Yeah.
Can't talk. We've been talking about a lot of things. Did your father say this to you? And so we had a secret pact that she wouldn't tell anything, but I've shared some things with her that were important. But I was scared to death.
Man, what a living dichotomy in that moment, right? You have this lack of certainty, lack of structure, and danger under the same roof as stability, certainty, and safety with your aunt. To walk between those two worlds and have to put on a mask and live differently multiple times throughout a day, whether in the presence of your father, Glad, or both at the same time. I mean, imagine as a young boy, that taught you a lot about putting on masks and learning how to survive.
It's all about survival. And it just became the way of being, is that, until I got old enough, and I was going to get beaten no matter what I did. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do, and that became its own set of problems. Okay. Cause now I'm getting bigger and he doesn't want to use the belt anymore. And then I got even more defiant. So imagine having a problem with authority. Like I had a lot of rage, and then I went in the military, and I had a problem with authority. Right. And so go in the Marine Corps. If you have a problem with authority, you'll have a pretty rough time,
Yeah, undoubtedly. I'm curious of the purpose that the military held for you, because you went in with one reason, right? To get that power back, right? To take this unfettered rage and, give it a channel to express. What was the experience? What was the outcome with your time in the military?
Well, it started out that I all my friends had felonies and I didn't. that was a big motivator. Like, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to get a felony. I'm not going to be able to go in. This is my ticket out of here. I wasn't going to college, you know, and so that was the first thing. And, you know, I wanted to make my dad proud. It was kind of a twisted sense of a son wanting his father to be proud of him, but hating him at the same time.
Right.
So I went in the Army, and I said, I want to go in the Army. He said, I'd be happy if you just did anything. He took me down the next morning, signed the paperwork. I was 17 and a half. It's called the Early Entry Program. He just wanted me out of there. And then like a week or 10 days before graduating Army boot camp, they discovered I had a major injury in my arm that wasn't fully healed up from a window accident where it cut all the muscles and the tendons and the nerves in my arm. So I didn't have any feeling in this part of my hand. But I was able to hide out amongst all the inductees and pass the physicals because nobody could see the injury. But all the way through boot camp, they kept giving me the stink eye because I could only do push-ups on my knuckles, and I didn't have any strength in these fingers, so they'd be sticking up on the pull-up bar. And finally, they just ripped me away from the group and said, "Is that a pre-existing injury?" You know, I'm like, "Yes." And then they just immediately separated me out of medical. And I went home so ashamed of myself that my dad wouldn't even shake my hand. He wouldn't let me in the house, you know, and wouldn't even, just stood in the doorway. I just grabbed my duffel bag, turned around, walked away. I lived in my friend's front yard in a camper for about a year, you know, and I got the harebrained idea that maybe I could get back in the military if I could get my arm working properly. Long story short, went down to the recruiter's office. They said, it's not. It's highly unlikely they're even going to talk to you. I'm like, highly unlikely? That means it's not impossible. And I did get him to talk to me, and I did get my physical. And instead of showing him, I go back in the Army, I went in the Marine Corps because he was in the Marine Corps, you know. And so, but I had a really incredible experience in the Marines, and I had stress fractures. Really, I didn't know I had stress fractures until I'm trying to run 10 miles in boots, you know, and they almost separated me because I had these really severe stress fractures and wearing shin splints. And in the Marine Corps, if you're wearing shin splints and you would look ridiculous, you look at the weakest guy in the platoon, you're the first guy that's going to get cut. And so, long story short, it taught me how to eat the pain, and it taught me how to really, really deal with pain and harden up. And then as soon as that took place, my fitness scores just went through the roof, and my life changed dramatically, you know, because I understood how to take care of myself, and I was now like 20 pounds of more full muscle, and I'd come home on leave, and like nobody ever wanted to fight. Like it was great because I didn't have to beat anybody up.
Man, so you had this physical transformation. Was that, I'm curious what role that physical transformation did to some of the deeper wounds that still played a role in you wanting to join the military or prove something to your father, or at least get something from your father that he wasn't giving. How long did the high of that physical transformation last? And then what was beneath that came to the surface again?
Well, when I think one way to look at that question is I wanted my father to deal with what he'd done to my family. So I took him for a drive when I got home on leave one time, and he was getting older and I was getting bigger and stronger. Yeah. Like he would never, ever he would never try to do anything to me ever again. But I wanted him to pay. So I took him for a drive one day outside of North Phoenix, and I pulled in an old abandoned gas station. I pulled in behind it with nobody around, and he was getting really nervous. And I intended to just annihilate him. But when I saw him getting older, and I realized I'm not him, I'm not you, I'm not going to be you. You know, I didn't do anything. I just kind of said, you know, I got some problems, you know, and I tried to talk to him. For the first time in my life, he actually had a conversation with me. I told him, I said, I have a problem with authority, and it's your fucking fault. Like, you know, I can't, you know, I'm getting into lots of trouble, and, you know, and I have a rage problem, and thanks a lot, you know, and he opened up and said that he had the same problems, and, you know, kind of teared up a little bit. I never saw that before. So for me, part of it was taking my power back. Whether he agreed with it or not, I took my power back. And I was able to settle that part of me down where he needed to acknowledge what he'd done. And I didn't really take it as far as I could have. I did that before he died, decades later. I really let him have it.
Yeah.
Okay, because there was a lot of stuff that was bubbling up. But I kind of carried this with me. The level of incongruence, I understand it's called internal cohesion. Like a lack of internal cohesion. Is who you're projecting really reflective of who you are deep down as a person? And I could say no. I was really broken. But I had this impeccable uniform in this presentation of being, a Marine in shape, but inside I was broken. Really, I felt damaged. There's something wrong with me was my prevailing belief.
Mm-hmm. That was that sounds like it was such a fine line to walk in that moment. I liken it to another phenomenal example of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey displayed, where Luke in Star Wars is given an opportunity to take his dad out, right, to make his father pay for all of his sins and transgressions. And you've got this Palpatine figure, this evil devil on the shoulder going, do it, strike him down, reclaim the power that you deserve, that you need, that you crave. And he says not to. He decides not to.
Right.
And in turn, fight the devil that's been pulling the strings. And so in that moment, you had an opportunity to really whoop your dad one good, right? And instead chose a different path, which is to expound and open up and share and say that this is the impact you've had on my life, your actions, your behaviors, the things you said and did to me and my brother and sister. Like, you need to know the impact of this. I'm curious with your relationship with your father, if or how did things change as you began to open up more and share the impact and the role that he was playing in your life throughout your relationship with him?
Ask me the question again. I'm trying to think about some things you want to ask about.
So how did your relationship with your father change as time went on and you started to share more with him? Like you said, as he got older and you got older, you really let him have it. Was there a change, or how did it change?
Well, it's interesting. My Aunt Gladys, she called me and asked me if I noticed anything different about my dad one time. My mom had Parkinson's for 35 years. My grandmother she was aging, so she moved into our house, and my dad was a full-time caregiver.
Wow.
He would get up, make him breakfast, go to work at the plant nursery, come home for lunch, make him lunch, go back to the nursery, come home, make him dinner, and they'd sleep on the couch, and they both had little bells if they needed medication or whatever they needed during the night, so he never really slept. And Gladys said that he'd been given the gift of empathy, of compassion, because now he couldn't beat anybody up. He couldn't be mean. And it really transformed him, But what I finally did when I was older, I said I got a lot of friends that are pretty upset with their dads, and they never said anything to them, and now they're gone. And when they get drunk enough, their anger comes out. And every time I ask, well, did you talk to him? No, you didn't know my dad, but if he was still here, I'd let him have it. And I'm like, okay, well, that's my cue. And I called my dad, he's living in Oklahoma. I said, look, I need you to just be quiet. I don't want you to say anything until I'm done. I got some stuff to say to you. I get too many friends that wish they would have told their dads what they needed to tell them before they left. And you're not too far away from that. Are you willing to shut up and listen? And he reluctantly agreed. And I just told him how devastating he was and how harmful it was, and that he should have gone to prison, and he knows it. And he tried to interrupt him, like, shut up, just don't say anything. And my sister, my mom, and I just went all the way through it. And ultimately, after a long pause, he said he was sorry. And I'm like, man, I need you to hurt a little more than that. Okay? And so I lay down some more. And all he could say was he saw it, he sees it, he was sorry, and he regrets it. And that just needed to be good enough. It took me a while to process that was good enough. What more am I going to get? Okay, that's more than most guys get. So I encourage adult children, if it's something like I'm dealing with, take some time to prepare a conversation or write a letter. Get it out of your system. Get that toxicity. Cough up the hairballs. And even if you never give it to them, even if you just ceremoniously throw it in a fire, you got to get all this stuff outside of yourself. And if you could talk to the person, what I wanted him to do is I wanted him to take the pain back. You own this. Okay, I'm tired of carrying the guilt. I'm tired of covering for you. I'm tired of acting like it's all okay. Like, I'm putting this all back on you, and you get to own it. I'm not living this life anymore with your shit.
Yeah. And I have seen many examples of what you've just explained done, and I have never heard a single person regret the process, whether the parent was still alive or not. A dear friend of mine, their name Maria Sebastiana, he's been on the show a couple times. He lost his father about 2 years ago, and I called him to check on him and see how he was doing, and he said, my little boy has heard everything he needed to hear from his dad. And I thought, man, that's the ticket right there. That's what my inner child needs before my folks knock on that door, right? That little boy needs to hear everything it needs to hear. And it sounds like, if I'm not mistaken, that, that sorry from your dad, it's not him who had all the power in this, in your suffering and your challenge. Like, you yourself had to take ownership for some of your own trauma and suffering. It wasn't just him holding the key.
Yeah, it's a great segue. Glad said to me in one of these, this conversation where she was saying, I've researched most every religion in the world, and I've come to a realization that she's not a religious person, but she's very spiritual. And she said, if you distill every major faith of the world down to a common denominator and you leave out the extreme aspects, every single one I've discovered feels that God is love. If you'll understand that, you can get along with anybody from any faith anywhere in the world. Okay? You don't have to get caught up in religion, but if you do, great. But this is a great thing. So do you believe that God is love? And I'm thinking, it took her a while to pull it out of me. And I said, that may be true for you, but not for me. Because why am I afraid of my father? And why does he hurt me? And why do all these bad things happen in my family? So no, I don't think God is love because all these bad things are happening. And she, long story short, she said, you're going to find your purpose and you're going to discover God is love for yourself. And it's going to take some time. But I'll look forward to that day when we're talking about it. And so I said, I think I'm too young to have a purpose, and so she just let it go. But I can't tell you how many times in violent, bad situations, like just before the impact, just before I was getting ready to get hurt or something really bad is going to happen, I can't remember the number of times I said, if God is love, why is this happening to me? Like, that was the prevailing question for my whole adult life, and I didn't discover it till 52 when I did some a Native American vision quest and a lot of plant medicine ceremonies. I found joy, which I never had any, and I discovered, like a lightning bolt, that the purpose of all my suffering for my whole life was to develop the gift of empathy to understand the pain of others. And that was a really cathartic moment because I was able to understand that my suffering served a purpose.
Yeah. There you go. You're able to place meaning and reframe the experience to go, no, because of this, cross-bared up 52 years, because of these experiences, it gives me access to truly understand what people are going through when they suffer trauma. That's so powerful, and that's something that I often think about my friends who have been through perhaps some of the toughest stuff, and they might place themselves very low in the totem pole of importance or significance or impact that they can have in their lives. And it's like, no, because you went through that thing, right? Because you were the biggest drug bust in Bonnaroo history and the leader of the whole thing, like, that's something that you can pull from that experience right. and teach others, like that's just one example. But because a friend of mine's experienced extraordinarily unfair grief in their life and loss, you have the ability to help walk alongside or guide or support someone to be able to take that trauma and give it a purpose. Not to distract you from the healing that's necessary, not to take away from the grief journey that continues for you or distract you from it, but to give it a both and. As I do my healing journey through grief, I can walk with others as they go through theirs. Right. And that's a big reason why the Mankind Project exists and why we have programs like A Vet's Journey Home, which you've been a part of and experienced. I'd love to hear about that, actually, just your experience with the Vet's Journey Home and what it taught you and how it... Yeah, because I'm sure as you were going through it, there was an opportunity to think about your father too.
Oh, yeah. I did a lot of shadow work. When I went through the Mankind Project, it was an eye-opener because I never really delved into shadow work, especially the way it's just put upon you. Like it's unexpected. It's startling. You're like, holy shit, I got to act this out, right? I got to do this right now. And it's like, and then you see other people being really vulnerable and you're supporting them, and all of a sudden you're being supported. It was a big shift for me to be able to act out some pretty violent situations that were going on, and it had a really deep effect on me. So I really appreciated the Mankind Project. My son was in the military in Afghanistan, so I had gone through it because he was getting out, and he called me from Afghanistan like September of 2003 and said he was too effed up to come home, from a satellite phone. And that was the most shocking call I've ever gotten in my life. And, he made it home alive. And so I went through the Mankind Project looking for resources. Like, I've got to go find some things to help combat vets when they come home, to help them rediscover themselves, And so I was just going through all these experiential retreats and programs. And so the Mankind Project really opened me up. And then, unfortunately, my son got killed when he got back from an adrenaline-seeking motorcycle accident. Out of the blue, all of a sudden he's gone. And so I go through the Vet's Journey Home program, which is a spinoff of the Mankind Project, similar processes. And went through it with a small group of veterans, and I've referred a lot of vets to the Mankind Project and Vet's Journey Home, but it was really part of my process because, like you're saying, it's therapeutic to be in service of others when you're hurting yourself. I write a lot about being the wounded healer. If I didn't move my pain, it was going to eat me alive. So I dove in and started adopting at-risk veterans, and really I was very comfortable self-medicating with, alcohol and pot and just being numb and checking out. And then when I was not numb, I was helping others. And for me, it was a way of moving my pain while I figured things out, while I began to mature in my grief and my suffering. And now, having been on the other side of that, I found joy. I found purpose. I'm happily married. I've got my life is so enriched, but it's a feeling of confliction that I miss my son, I miss other people, but I'm here. And it took me a long time to figure out that, hey, no matter what I've been through, no matter how heartbreaking or traumatizing, I deserve to live a fulfilling life. And when I believed that long enough, I finally came to the conclusion, and I deserve to be happy. But being the wounded healer helped me mature in my grief and loss. That's what it did. It did for me. Being of service to others helped me get outside of myself, because I was just dwelling with like a deep depression. Some suicidal thoughts, like, it's crazy to go from being a father to not being a father. So processing all these things and dealing with other families helped me avoid the deep stuff. And that's when I came across the hero's journey in more detail. I'd like to talk to you more about that, because I started writing this book as a therapeutic writing project to cough up these hairballs and just get it out of my system so I could look at things and process them. And I got 30 years of these little abstracts and pieces of writing. And then I started watching Finding Joe, which is a documentary on Netflix.
Great documentary.
And I kept seeing it. I scrolled through it for a year, like Finding Joe. And then finally I click on it. Oh, it's about finding Joseph Campbell. That was really interesting. And then I started watching it, and there was a graphic, a really cool graphic. I'll show it to you sometime. I did a screen capture on my laptop, and it's got this really good arc of the hero's journey. Really well done, better than I've ever seen. Well, the documentary is funded by the Joseph Campbell Foundation, so no wonder. And so I took the screenshot and I put it in PowerPoint, and I started creating these little text snippets. And I said, I wonder what my hero's journey looks like. And I started creating all these snippets, like 60 or 70 of them, that followed the arc, all the trials, all the magical helpers, right? Coming home with a magical elixir, which is really who I've become. And that turned into my table of contents. So literally, I can show you that map, and then I can show you my table of contents. And I started writing, and with a sense of freedom. And I saved all the worst parts of my experiences for last, but I covered all the fun stuff, all the adventure stuff, and it just started turning into this book. And that's how this really came to be, because it was never supposed to see the light of day. I was writing it under somebody else's name. It was my personal journals, and I was mortified that anybody would ever see it or read it. So if I did do it, I was going to do it under somebody else's name. And then at the end, I'm like, this is it. This is it. This is what it is, and unapologetically. And that's been a healing experience of its own, is being vulnerable and transparent. It's so authentically that there's no misunderstanding, I think, what's going on. It's not sugar-coated. It's pretty gritty in parts of the book, but it's really, I think, healing. It's not a self-help book. It's a transformational body of work that's disguised as a narrative memoir.
That's powerful, John. I mean, you were able to essentially self-author, in retrospect, to go back through your life and see all the different roles, all the different stages of the journey. And I think that's such a powerful reminder as to why I would encourage everyone to check out Finding Joe, the documentary. If you want to go deeper, A Hero of a Thousand Faces, his book that really, really explains the hero's journey. We're talking about a man who traveled the world, living with different cultures and different communities that hadn't physically been in the same area for like 200,000 years, right? If we're looking at evolution, like these are groups of people that have not been together in that time, and all their myths, stories, and legends follow the same 12 stages. You have this reluctant hero that wants something but doubts themselves, and then a guide comes along and shows them, like someone who's done the journey before, you're glad, right? Your great aunt, who then opens their eyes to a whole new potential, a whole new world, and there begins the hero's journey, crossing that threshold into something outside of your comfort zone, outside of the norm. And as a therapeutic process, there have been various stages of my life where I've been very depressed, very down, challenges with suicidal ideation, and my mum has always been quite powerful in reminding me of the mountains climbed, to go, is this the same person that achieved XYZ and overcame ABC odds, and just kind of put this thing into perspective to go, hey, maybe this mountain I'm facing right now is really just a molehill in the grand scheme of things. And that your journey, your past, John, although much of it incredibly traumatizing and challenging, was still journeys around the hero's journey, right? It was still you taking those steps to become the person that you are, to then enjoy this enriched life and abundance, right? To be able to guide others as a mentor now. I mean, I'm sure Glad would be incredibly proud of you to now be in a position to help the next generation or the person next to you that's going through these challenges in life, trying to make that journey home as a combat veteran, reframing their trauma. I mean, it's truly powerful, John, and you very much embody what that journey looks like.
I appreciate that. I was fortunate. I'll clarify one thing. My son was a combat veteran. My dad was a combat veteran, and I trained in a special unit in the Marine Corps called Anglico. I was fortunate enough to be in between conflicts. But I can tell you, like a lot of guys that I served, is I had combat envy, like so terribly, because you train for it and we need to be tested. And that's just the bottom line. Why else would you do this unless to go to war? It's a Spartan-like mentality.
Yeah.
And
makes me think of Jarhead, right?
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
he doesn't get to take the shot.
Exactly. And so I lived with that for a while until my son called me from Afghanistan, and I had to deal with the aftermath of him going through transition and the amount of trauma. I mean, he told me everything. Like I was lucky enough to where he could really talk to me, and all that combat envy went away 100%. It's like, oh my gosh, I would have been worse off. I probably wouldn't have survived. Okay, I have enough trauma as it is. I had a lot of rage and retribution, and that would have just been ignited like a powder keg. So I'm really thankful that a lot of combat vets, most all of my buddies are combat vets, and because of my status with my son, they give me a little bit of gratitude, or a little latitude, I should say, and I understand, having been around this world multi-generationally, that it is a very tough concept for somebody to say, like, literally I was shooting somebody a few days ago, and now 3 days later I'm cooking eggs for my kids. It's a really sitting with vets, and especially doing the men's work. I've been doing a lot of men's work. As a matter of fact, that's the only thing I do. Is I don't do anything that's couples oriented or family or co-ed. I really appreciate doing the deep work with men, and I don't do men's groups. I don't lead them. I'm more interested in supporting really great leaders that are doing the men's work, and there's a bunch of them that are just emerging, like yourself, like younger guys who have really been through the shit and are young enough now, but the wisdom that's coming out in these 20, 30, 40-year-old men, it's like the next generation. We need to support that. So I'm happy to lead the applause and be of support, and quite frankly, really quietly just see what I can do to help this movement grow. I'm not really interested in speaking and leading, but I see I can play a role in helping others do that.
I love that, because there's plenty of people wanting to be the star of the show, and more often than not, it's based upon trying to build or sustain some idea of self-importance. Whereas you're finding your niche, you're finding where you need to be to have the most impact that you can and want to give. I want to ask you, what would you say to someone, and it's kind of a twofold question here. What would you say to someone who is a combat veteran, perhaps very much in transition right now, coming back to civilian life, who is challenged, who is struggling, who is really having a hard time with that transition? And then we'll follow that with, what do you say to someone who knows of someone close to them who's going through that transition and how they can support?
Okay, well, a couple of things. what they don't tell you when you're getting out of the military, whether you're a combat vet or a non-combat vet, it's like, I can speak for myself. It's like they hand you a grenade and they tell you to hold on to it really tight, not for your safety, but then they they pull the pin and they kick you out the door, and you spend a lot of time not wanting people to know what's really inside. Like, there's a lot of magma. There's a lot of really bad experiences that you're stuffing down and stuffing away. And like when I got out of the military, I had a very compartmentalized emotions where I could only experience certain things. I would only allow myself. I had a very limited vocabulary. The biggest deficit that I see for virtually most every veteran is they don't teach you how to transition after military service. They do a great job of galvanizing you into a machine, into a warrior, but they don't do anything to decommission you and kind of say, okay, what's going on here?
Bring you home.
What I discovered with my son, which is really a fabulous experience with both of us, is identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. When you're in the military, you have an identity. I mean, you own that identity. It's something you're proud of. Every day you have a mission that you are assigned. You know what that is, and you got to get after it. And then meaning and purpose. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than protecting somebody to the left and the right, in front and behind you. And
knowing that they got you.
They got you, right? Yeah. And so purpose, meaning and purpose. So identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. I spent so much time, like I wrote my first book and recorded my first audiobook called Transitioning Veterans, How We Get in Our Own Way and What to Do About It. And in that book, in that audiobook, I take apart identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. I wrote this book for combat vets who are absolutely not going to ask for help. It's a sign of weakness. I don't want anything in my medical records. I don't want to be passed over for promotion or lose my security clearance because I sought help. So these barriers to care keep most veterans from seeking help when there's all kinds of help that's available. So I wrote this audio book. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long for combat veterans who are reluctant to ask for help, and they can listen to this in the privacy of their own mind with nobody knowing that they're getting help. And we go into these aspects of identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. Boy, and if you're a family member and you want to understand how to talk to your veteran, man, identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. We need to reinvent ourselves. We need to create a new identity. Because when they kick you out, you walk around with this huge void you can't fill up with drugs or sex or porn or alcoholism or adrenaline seeking or workaholism. And our families aren't designed to understand it. Mm-mm. So little things like if you go to transitioningveteransbook.com, like the whole audio book is there for free. It's a dedication. It's a memorial project for my son Danny, but it'll take you through. And what I find interesting, Brandon, is I did it as a dual recording because we all have a critical mind that's constantly hijacking us, that's taking away precious moments from when we should be present, but we're thinking about being triggered, like threats, or people are jerks, or need to watch out for this, right? And so veterans are just like a super exaggerated, startled responses and this hypervigilant.
Okay, welcome back to the Mankind Podcast. We just had a power outage, yet here we are back. And John, you were sharing that with transitioning veterans in your book, you had another veteran come on, right? And
so he plays the voice of the critical mind that's always hijacking moments, and I play the voice of the rational, reasonable mind. And so it's an interview back and forth, and the banter and the ridiculousness that anybody who suffered trauma has a critical mind. Like most anybody, in general, it's always in the back of your mind telling you you're not good enough, or, watch out for this or that. But with trauma, it's amplified, okay? Very, very, very intrusive. And so we bring attention to what it's like to go to crowded restaurants in the book. We bring attention to how to manage and how to self-regulate when you get triggered. It is a very, very simple 3-step process about, how to recognize when you're triggered instead of being caught up in it. And so those are the kind of resources I'm talking about, is real, tangible, like identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. Get grounded in who you're becoming. Because when veterans are in this depth of despair and they realize that, they're being asked to sit around and watch the grass grow, when they've been given permission to be taken off safe and go do, credible things. All of a sudden they're back home and nobody understands them. It's about reinvention. And what I think is really cool, when most veterans realize that I've got to reinvent myself and get back to those 4 areas, they start running towards who they're becoming. They wake up, and I often don't hear from them for years. And when I do, they're like, "Man, that was so important. I needed that." So, and if they've been out in the world for a while, they have had some level of success, but now the bad things are eating away at their relationships, at their family life, at their careers. There's no better way for most vets to go back and say, when were you at your prime, at your premium self? Like, when is that best part of you where you showed up and you knew who you were? And then we go back and we use that sense of galvanizing identity, mission, meaning, and purpose to say, let's go back and let's refurbish like where you are right now. Let's take that previous version of yourself and let's use that certainty and confidence that you already have. Like, you did this, I didn't. And so I just help them get reoriented back towards that former version of themselves to kind of like, okay, now who am I now? Bringing that confidence from then to now.
Yeah. Reminding them what they're capable of, reminding them the mountains they've climbed, and that they don't have to do the hero's journey the same way they've done it, because they're evolved. They're a different person. Here's the elixir you got from that journey. Use that elixir to do it differently now going forward. That's such a powerful process. I mean, and I can't imagine the sense of, my word. So please correct me if this is not the experience to you, but the sense of satisfaction that probably comes from, walking alongside these veterans as they go through this process. Identity, mission, meaning, purpose. What comes up for me is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. He argues Freud's stance that man's search was purely for pleasure, and he argues against that and says, no, it's for meaning. It is to find meaning. And along with that meaning, I believe comes identity, mission, and purpose. And to go into boot camp and to be broken down, to lose your identity, to be turned into a warrior, to do a job, right? A dutiful job, but then to come home with no outlet, path, guidance on how to turn up in that way. Or guess what? Everything you've just been taught to do is no longer applicable in being a dad, in being a wife, in being a civilian anymore. There's got to be that support and guidance, and it may not be exactly, I think about, have you seen the documentary Restrepo?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think of that, the director's name from that, but he spoke a lot about how many of those depicted in the movie didn't want to go home because they were terrified of what life would look like. The uncertainty was petrifying.
Well, how can you say to somebody you love that I'd rather be in combat? They can't unhear. But that is mostly what's going on, is that these guys and gals, they get bonded to trauma. They feel a sense of certainty and their self-reliance and protecting other people, but when you get out, the biggest challenge I see with veterans, including myself, is that we get out and we're learned. Like, we know who we are. Okay, thank you for the advice. Appreciate it. I'm going to do my own thing. Right? And it's a stubbornness. And Eric Hoffer, who wrote a book called True Believer and a bunch of others, really a great philosopher. He was a longshoreman, I think, back in the 40s and 50s. Just a big, tough guy. He said, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists.
Ooh, say that again for the people in the back.
In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. That sums up the veteran experience so well, because you're beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. We need more identity, mission, meaning, and purpose orientation and training and support to repurpose, all this investment that the military has made into creating great leaders, some of the best leadership training in the world. Yet people are walking out saying, I can't find the right kind of job. There's just so many different aspects to transition that, if you think about it, America's been going to war for over a couple hundred years now. We should understand how to do homecoming. We should be able to get that right. We still haven't got it right.
So, John, in our time connecting in and around the podcast and having this conversation, you've mentioned the importance of the kind of magical helpers that come along the way in your hero's journey and the role that they can play. Tell me more about that.
Glad told me early on, like, hey, pay attention to the people that you meet by chance, because they're often the ones who are here to teach you the most. So be curious. Something happens, you get distracted, you miss your train, whatever, just notice people are coming into your influence and pay attention. And so I was naturally curious, and I met the most extraordinary people that have helped me along my way. And what got me into this whole field of personal development and transformational development in the first place was a magical helper in Okinawa, Japan, 2 weeks before I was getting out of the Marine Corps. And really, I never saw the guy again. I only talked to him for like 5 to 8, maybe 10 minutes. And he said to me, hey, he was a warrant officer, somebody who'd been in the military as an enlisted person, went back to college, came back in as an officer. So he's been there, done that kind of guy. I'm like, you listen to a warrant officer. And he said, you're going to get out of the Marines in a couple of weeks, and you're going to notice really quick that the world is exactly the same, but you've changed. And instead of sitting here drinking and getting loud with my buddies, if I were you, I'd go to the closest bookstore, and I'd go to the self-help section, not the psychology section, and I'd find anything that jumps off the shelf at me, and I'd start reading about who I'm becoming. And I'd never even really been in a bookstore. I certainly hadn't read very many books. But he just said, you're going to realize real quick that the world doesn't need another hard-ass Marine who can parachute out of helicopters at night and carry big, heavy packs and put a round on range. People don't care about that stuff. You got to start focusing on who you're becoming. So I went to the bookstore. I never saw the guy again. Shook his hand. I wish I could shake it again. And I've been paying this little conversation forward thousands of times since those early days. So I went to the bookstore. On the Marine Corps bases, they didn't have bookstores, so we went to the Air Force base, and I went to the self-help section. I had to have somebody help me find it, and I picked up 3 books: The Magic of Thinking Big by Schwartz, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and then this really odd book called Psycho-Cybernetics with Maxwell Maltz. And I talk about this one a lot because Maxwell Maltz was a plastic surgeon who made people beautiful, but they couldn't see it because of their self-image. And so that was me. I had this impeccable uniform and this external persona that I had curated, but inside it was totally incongruent, totally broken, and in need of a lot of work. And so you pay attention to the people you meet by chance. These magical helpers on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, they show up at the end of your rope. Like, you meet your greatest teachers at the end of your rope. That's the way it is a lot of times, the way it's been for me. So magical helpers, you got to include them, and you got to be open to them. And when you open yourself up to that realization that I'm curious, who am I going to meet? Great things happen.
I love that. I mean, that's the beauty of like the conversation we're having right now. It was, you did an interview with Mike Patterson, and it was, hey, you need to meet my friend Brandon and his show. And
right.
We have a cool link in the Mankind Projects. We have a shared experience to some degree going through the new warrior training, and look where we are today. I can't begin to tell you the amount of times I've gotten an email from someone I have never met in my entire life, and they've just said, thank you, can I please have the email of guest in episode 33, because my life has dramatically changed from this little gem that was a side tangent that was never meant to be a part of the podcast Like, that's the beauty in this, in talking about these experiences and talking about trauma and gleaming from you the life lessons you've learned from some huge extreme experiences. We've got just a couple minutes, John. Mate, I want to hear about Be the Dawn in the Darkness, your latest book, the purpose behind it, and, really describe to me the list, who is the avatar or the person that this book was designed for?
Well, I would say men who are really trying to understand themselves, women that are trying to understand the men that they love in their life, and virtually anybody. Women love the book because it has this powerful female matriarch who just is so alive and involved throughout the book. So it's for anybody who suffers from trauma, depression, grief, loss, and they're looking for a way through, because about 50% of the book it's really challenging. But once it gets through into the second half of the book, it becomes more aspirational. And it is about the relentless pursuit of becoming who we are meant to be. And it gets into mindfulness, it gets into non-duality, it gets into shadow work, it gets into identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. And it gets into Native American and First Nations rituals, ceremonies that I thought were very powerful. And then a very big area about plant medicines. I don't do a lot of plant medicines anymore because I did my work and I'm really, really good. I don't feel called. But for me, that was just a major transcendence. It's like soul retrieval, So, and my wife criticizes me for this, but if you go to harvestingwisdom.com, you can read the first 7 chapters or listen to the first 4 chapters on me, and so you can really kind of look at the table of contents and see if this resonates with you, and then buy it. I just want to be generous with this work. I'm not looking to get consulting gigs or speaking engagements, or really, I'd rather lead the applause and really help other people. That's what this book is really about. It's a deeply transformational body of work that's disguised as a narrative memoir. And anytime I felt like I was teaching or preaching, I pulled that content out, because I want people to learn through the experience visceral learning. Like, I'm in it and I get it and I understand this lesson that was just learned, and how this now builds upon, the next chapter builds upon it. And each chapter is a whole story, like a scene in a movie that's whole and complete, but are connected on this arc of the hero's journey.
Fantastic. Beautiful, John. Well, to our listeners, there are going to be plenty of links in the show notes to many of the things we've spoken about, including the Finding Joe documentary. We're going to give you a link to harvestingwisdom.com as well, so that you can find those chapters to check it out for yourself. I would encourage you just to take the leap and purchase the thing, because I can tell you right now, and I'm looking at the feedback that you've had from some pretty big wigs in the psychology and therapy space, mate. It's a resounding hands up, get your hands on this book, as well as links to transitioningveteransbook.com. You can find links to that as well if you or yourself are being impacted by the experience of transitioning home, whether you yourself or someone you love or care about is going through that transition. Man, John, I sincerely hope this isn't the last time we get to spend time together and talk about this. In fact, as we've had many veterans panels as a part of this show and our previous show, Mask Off Monday. I'd love to have you a part of any of those conversations going forward, where we bring a bunch of veterans together, whether it's on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, to have your input, share your wisdom and insights, and stay a part of the conversation here on the Mankind Podcast. So, mate, thank you so much for being here.
I'm all in. Thank you so much. I mean, I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise, mate, likewise. So you can find out more about John Henry Parker, guys, again, in the show notes. And I want to thank all of you who join us each week to hear these conversations, to take the masks off, to really see what could be possible in your men's work journey, or if you don't identify as a bloke, as well, your own individual journey. We certainly do our best to deliver the goods and We appreciate your understanding and support if we're not releasing those episodes weekly, as we're still navigating the loss of our dear brother and engineer for the podcast, Michael Russer. So always want to make a moment at the end of these to dedicate these shows to him and the incredible work that he put into us getting here, and gratitude to our guests and gratitude to you listeners as well. You all make this possible. So remember, the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. What do you say, John? Have we done that today?
I believe so.
Hear, hear. Lots of love. We'll see you next week.